Alright, I never thought I'd be here, pouring my heart out to a bunch of strangers on Reddit, but it seems like the only place where I can get this all off my chest without feeling judged. So, here we go. Let me tell you how everything went to shit. I'm Lucas Steiner, the younger son of a pretty well-off family. My parents own this big manufacturing company, you know, the kind that makes enough money that people assume you're set for life. But here's the thing, I never gave a damn about it. I wanted to make my own way in the world, build something of my own, and not just sit around waiting for my parents to hand me the keys to the family business like my older brother Thomas. Thomas was always the golden boy. Everyone thought he was the chosen one, the future leader of the empire. And me? Well, I was just the guy who stayed in the background, working hard, keeping my head down, and trying not to get involved in the family drama. And then there was Emily, my wife. I thought I hit the jackpot with her. She was smart, beautiful, charming, everything you could want. I mean, we had our share of fights, sure, but what couple doesn't? In the beginning, she made me feel like I was the luckiest man alive. But now, looking back, I see it all for what it was: manipulation. I was blind. She was always dropping little comments here and there, you know? It's not fair that Thomas gets everything, Lucas. You deserve more. Why don't you stand up for yourself? You're just as important to the family business. She would throw these lines at me like she cared about me, but now I see it for what it was. She was always angling for the money, the power, the family status. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured she just wanted the best for me, maybe a little too pushy, but hey, I thought she had my back. Naive, right? I didn't want anything to do with the family business, and I made that clear from day one. But Emily never let it go. She'd always bring it up in casual conversations, hinting that I should demand more from my parents. I would shrug it off, thinking she was just ambitious. Meanwhile, Thomas was living it up. Fancy cars, expensive vacations, and barely lifting a finger at the company. He was the kind of guy who knew how to charm people, but deep down, he was lazy as hell. My parents always talked about how Thomas is the future of this company, and they believed he was the rightful heir. I didn't care. Honestly, I was relieved. I wanted to build my own thing, you know? I didn't need their money or their approval. Or at least, that's what I told myself back then. I'm not gonna lie, there were red flags with Emily, but I ignored them. She always seemed a little too interested in the family fortune, constantly talking about how I was selling myself short by not going after a bigger slice of the pie. I told her, I don't need any of that. I'm fine with what I have. She would smile and nod, but deep down, I knew she didn't agree. She wanted more, way more. But I brushed it off like an idiot. I mean, come on, it's your wife, right? You don't think they're going to stab you in the back while they're whispering sweet nothings in your ear. But man, was I wrong. Things started to shift after Thomas came back from one of his ridiculous, month-long business trips, which, by the way, were just glorified vacations. Emily started acting weird, getting real distant, making excuses to stay out late or cancel plans. At first, I didn't think too much of it. We'd been married for a few years by this point, and I figured it was just a rough patch. Everyone goes through those, right? But then I started to notice the way she would talk about Thomas. It was subtle, but there was something there, some kind of admiration, or maybe even obsession. She would say things like, Thomas really knows how to live, doesn't he? Or, you could learn a thing or two from your brother. I didn't think much of it. Honestly, I thought she was just frustrated with me. I had been working long hours, trying to get my own projects off the ground. We weren't spending as much time together, and I figured maybe she was just bored, or maybe I wasn't giving her enough attention. I tried to fix things, you know? I started planning more date nights, spending more time with her. But nothing seemed to work. She was always distracted, always glued to her phone, or making up some excuse to be somewhere else. Then one day, I came home early from work. I don't even know why, I just had a feeling that something wasn't right. When I walked through the front door, the house was dead quiet. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I couldn't figure out why. I headed upstairs to our bedroom, and that's when my world came crashing down. There they were, Emily and Thomas, right in the middle of our bed. My wife and my own brother, naked, together. I couldn't fucking believe it. For a second, I just stood there, frozen, like my brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. But then the rage hit me like a freight train. I stormed into the room and punched Thomas, so hard he flew off the bed and hit the wall. Emily screamed, covering herself up, but I didn't care. I didn't even look at her. I grabbed Thomas by the throat and threw him out of the house, half naked, with nothing but the clothes he managed to scoop off the floor. I thought Emily would be apologetic, or at least show some kind of remorse. But nah, she just sat there completely unfazed like it was no big deal. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Thomas is way better in bed than you'll ever be, Lucas. You should have known this was coming." That's when it hit me. She never loved me. She was using me from the start, trying to worm her way into the family fortune. And the whole time, I was the idiot who thought I was marrying someone who actually gave a shit about me. She wasn't just sleeping with my brother. She was cutting me out of my own life. She didn't even try to explain herself or apologize. She just packed her shit and left. I'll never forget that moment. The sound of the door closing behind her was like the final nail in the coffin of my marriage. After Emily walked out of the door, it felt like the whole world stopped. The silence in the house was deafening, but inside my head, it was chaos. I couldn't wrap my mind around what had just happened. I mean, your wife cheating on you with some guy is one thing, but your own brother? In your own bed? I felt like the biggest idiot on the planet. I just stood there for what seemed like hours, staring at the door, trying to make sense of it all. But the truth was there wasn't any sense to it. It was betrayal in its rawest, ugliest form. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My mind kept replaying the scene over and over again, like some kind of sick movie on repeat. Emily, Thomas, together. My wife and my brother, who I trusted more than anyone, both stabbing me in the back. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. My chest felt tight, my fists clenched. I wanted to scream, to break something. Anything to release the rage boiling inside me. I spent the next few days in a fog. I didn't go to work. I didn't talk to anyone. I just stayed at home, replaying every moment of my marriage in my head, trying to figure out where things went wrong. I couldn't believe I didn't see it coming. The signs were all there, but I ignored them like a blind fool. Emily had been distant for months. Hell, maybe even years, and Thomas had always been a little too chummy with her. I just never put two and two together. Looking back, there were so many moments where I should have known something was up, like how Emily would always defend Thomas, even when it was obvious he was being a lazy asshole. Or how she'd cancel our plans last minute to go, hang out with friends, and come back late at night, smelling like someone else's cologne. I should have asked more questions. I should have paid more attention. But I didn't, and now I was paying the price. It wasn't until about a week later that I finally snapped out of my daze. I knew I couldn't keep sitting around feeling sorry for myself. I needed answers. I needed to confront Emily. I needed to figure out what the hell had really been going on behind my back. So, I called her. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe some kind of explanation or apology, but instead, she answered the phone like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just destroyed my entire life. Her voice was calm, almost cold. "What do you want, Lucas?" she asked, as if I was the one who owed her an apology. I could feel the anger rising up inside me again, but I tried to keep it together. "I want to know why," I said through gritted teeth. "Why the hell did you do it? Why my brother?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a second, I thought she was actually going to break down and admit she screwed up, but of course, that would have been too easy. "Why?" she finally said, her voice dripping with indifference. "Because you're weak, Lucas. You've always been weak. You let your brother walk all over you, and you were too blind to see it. Thomas is a real man. He knows what he wants, and he takes it. You've spent your whole life trying to stay out of his shadow. But the truth is, you'll never be as good as him. Not in business, not in life, and definitely not in bed." I swear, I almost threw the phone across the room. I wanted to reach through the screen and throttle her, but all I could do was listen. It was like she was enjoying this, rubbing salt in the wound, twisting the knife even deeper. "I can't believe you," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You were never with me for love, were you? This was all about the money, about getting closer to the family fortune." She didn't even hesitate. "Of course it was Lucas. Did you really think I married you because I loved you? You're pathetic. All you ever did was play second fiddle to Thomas. I needed a man who could give me the life I deserve, and that was never going to be you." At that point, I couldn't take it anymore. I hung up. My head was spinning, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. She admitted it flat out. She never loved me. She was just using me as a stepping stone to get closer to the family wealth. And Thomas, my own brother, was part of her plan all along. The betrayal hit me like a tidal wave. I wanted to punch something, to scream, to break every single piece of furniture in the house. But I didn't. Instead, I grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the kitchen and downed half of it before collapsing on the couch, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let this happen? I had always prided myself on being the sensible one, the one who didn't get caught up in the family drama or the bullshit power struggles. But now, I was right in the middle of it, and it was tearing me apart. Over the next few days, the anger turned into something else, something colder, more calculated. I started thinking about revenge. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I wasn't going to be the idiot who just rolled over and let his wife and brother fuck him over. No, I was going to make them pay. I didn't know how yet, but I was damn sure going to figure it out. But first, I had to deal with my family. I knew I couldn't keep this quiet forever. My parents were going to find out sooner or later, and when they did, it was going to blow everything wide open. So one night, after drowning myself in enough whiskey to take the edge off, I called them. I told them everything. The affair, the betrayal, all of it. My mom, Marianne, was devastated. She couldn't believe Thomas would do something like this. My dad, Hans, was silent at first, but I could tell he was furious. He had always defended Thomas, always believed he would take over the family business one day, but now that dream was dead. "We need to talk," my dad said. "This changes everything." I didn't know what he meant at the time, but I could feel the shift. The family dynamic was about to get ripped apart, and Thomas was about to lose everything he had taken for granted his whole life. After that call with my dad, everything moved faster than I could process. The tension was so thick, you could have cut it with a knife. The next morning, my parents showed up at my house. They didn't even give me a heads up. They just knocked on my door, looking like they'd seen a ghost. I knew this conversation was going to be brutal, but I wasn't ready for just how deep it would cut. I invited them in, and we sat in the living room, the same place where Emily and I had so many perfect little moments. It felt sick now, sitting in the house where she had brought my brother into our bed. My mom, Marianne, looked like she had aged 10 years overnight. Her eyes were red, probably from crying, and she kept fidgeting with her wedding ring, something she always did when she was anxious. My dad, Hans, sat there stone-faced. He wasn't one to show his emotions, but I knew he was furious. And not just at Thomas. I could feel the disappointment radiating off of him, like somehow this whole thing was my fault. "We need to talk about Thomas," my dad said, his voice low and serious. I sat there, bracing myself for what was coming. I thought they were going to defend him, tell me I needed to move past it for the sake of the family. But what came next completely blindsided me. "We had no idea about any of this, Lucas," my mom said softly, her voice trembling. "I can't believe Thomas would do something like this. To you. To the family." I stared at her, my mind racing. For the first time in my life, I saw real disappointment in her eyes. Not directed at me, but at Thomas. She had always defended him, always put him on a pedestal, but now that pedestal had crumbled, and she was finally seeing him for who he really was. "We've been thinking," my dad chimed in, his voice steady but cold. "This whole situation with Thomas, it's unacceptable. He's proven that he's not responsible enough to take over the business. Hell, he's not responsible enough for anything." I could feel the weight of what he was saying, but it still didn't make sense to me. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're cutting Thomas out," he said bluntly. "Effective immediately." I sat there, stunned. Cutting Thomas out? That was huge. My parents had always planned for him to take over the family business, and now, just like that, they were throwing him out? I didn't know whether to feel relieved or devastated. This wasn't just about the business. This was about our entire family dynamic. Thomas had always been the favorite, the golden boy, and now he was about to lose everything. "He's a liability, Lucas," my dad continued. "We can't trust him anymore. He's shown us his true colors. And we need someone we can rely on to keep the business going." I knew where this was headed, but I didn't want to believe it. I had never wanted to be part of the family business. I had spent my whole life trying to carve out my own path, to be my own man. But now, everything was shifting, and I could feel the weight of it settling on my shoulders. "We want you to take over, Lucas," my mom said, her voice shaky but determined. "You've always been the responsible one. You've worked hard, you've never asked for anything. It's time for you to get what you deserve." I looked at them, my head spinning. I didn't want this. I didn't want to be dragged into the mess that Thomas had created. But at the same time, I couldn't deny the satisfaction that came with knowing he was finally getting what he deserved. After years of living off the family's wealth, of treating the business like his personal ATM, Thomas was being cut out. And Emily, oh, I could just imagine the look on her face when she found out that all her scheming had been for nothing. But it wasn't that simple. I couldn't just jump into this without thinking it through. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," I admitted. "This is huge." My dad nodded, his expression softening for the first time since he'd walked through the door. "We know it's a lot to ask, Lucas, but we believe in you. You've always been the one who could handle responsibility. Thomas, well, he's proven he can't." I sat back, running my hands through my hair. This was too much too fast. I had spent my whole life staying out of the family business, and now they wanted me to take over? To step into Thomas's shoes and run everything? But then I thought about Thomas, about how he had been given everything on a silver platter, and how he had thrown it all away. I thought about Emily, how she had manipulated me, used me to get closer to the family fortune. I had been too passive for too long. It was time to take control of my life, to stop letting other people walk all over me. "I'll do it," I said, the words coming out before I had fully processed them. "I'll take over." My parents both looked relieved, like a huge weight had been lifted off their shoulders. My mom even smiled a little, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're proud of you, Lucas," she said softly. "We know this isn't what you wanted, but it's the right thing to do." After they left, I sat there in silence, trying to absorb everything that had just happened. I had just agreed to take over the family business. Thomas was out and I was in. The entire family dynamic had shifted, and I was right in the middle of it. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt empowered. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in Thomas's shadow. I was in control now, but with that control came responsibility. I knew I couldn't let my guard down. Not with Emily still out there, probably plotting her next move. She had always been after the family fortune, and now that Thomas was out, I was the one with the power. I knew it was only a matter of time before she came crawling back, trying to weasel her way into my life again. But I wasn't the same man I had been before. I wasn't going to let her use me anymore. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I officially took over the business, meeting with lawyers, accountants, and all the higher-ups to get everything in order. It was a steep learning curve, but I threw myself into it, determined to prove that I could handle it. For once in my life, I felt like I had something to fight for, something that was mine. Meanwhile, Thomas's life was falling apart. Word spread quickly about what had happened, and soon, he was the black sheep of the family. He had burned every bridge, and now, he was left with nothing. Emily, of course, had moved in with him right after she left me, thinking she was securing her place in the Steiner fortune. But once she realized that Thomas was out of the picture, that there was no money coming his way, her attitude changed. I heard through the grapevine that they were fighting constantly. Emily was furious. She had thrown her lot in with Thomas, only to watch him lose everything. She was stuck with a man who had nothing to offer her anymore. And Thomas, well, he was finally facing the consequences of a lifetime of bad decisions. For once, I didn't feel sorry for him. Taking over the family business wasn't something I had ever imagined for myself. Hell, I spent most of my life trying to stay as far away from it as possible, letting Thomas play the role of the heir while I focused on my own thing. But now, everything had changed. I was no longer the sidelined younger brother. Now, I was in charge, and the entire family business rested on my shoulders. It was overwhelming, sure, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had real control over my life. I wasn't just Lucas, the second son. I was the one calling the shots. The first few months were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and learning the ins and outs of the company. I had no choice but to throw myself into it, working long hours to get up to speed. I knew I couldn't afford to screw this up, not with the eyes of every board member, investor, and employee on me. But there was also a part of me that relished the challenge. I wasn't just doing this to prove myself to my parents or to the people who doubted me. I was doing it for me. I needed to prove that I was capable, that I could run this company and succeed on my own terms. It wasn't easy, though. There were nights when I'd come home exhausted, my mind racing with all the responsibilities piling up on me. And sometimes, in the quiet of my empty house, my thoughts would drift back to Emily. I hated that she still had that power over me, that she still occupied space in my head after everything she'd done. But the truth was, no matter how much I tried to focus on the business, the sting of her betrayal was always there, lurking in the background. But as the weeks turned into months, I started to get the hang of things. The business began to thrive under my leadership. I brought in new partners, restructured some of the company's outdated practices, and even launched a few new initiatives that helped us reach new markets. One of those partners was Anna Hoffman, a sharp, no-nonsense businesswoman with an eye for innovation. From the moment we started working together, I knew she was the real deal. She was ambitious, driven, and knew exactly what it took to make things happen. We worked closely on several projects, and I have to admit there was something about her that I found refreshing. She wasn't like Emily. Anna wasn't interested in my last name or the family fortune. She was all about the work, the hustle, the grind. There was no pretense with her, just honesty and ambition. It was like a breath of fresh air after the suffocating mess of my marriage. As for Thomas and Emily, well, their situation was unraveling faster than I could have predicted. I started hearing things through the family grapevine. Thomas, stripped of his inheritance and left with nothing but his own incompetence, was struggling to find work. His whole life, he had banked on the idea that the family business would take care of him. Now, with that safety net ripped away, he was floundering. And Emily? Well, she had hitched her wagon to the wrong horse, and it was dragging her down with it. The first time I ran into Emily after she left, it was at a charity event. I didn't even know she'd be there, but as soon as I spotted her, all those old feelings, the anger, the betrayal, flooded back. She was with Thomas, of course, but they didn't look like the smug, confident couple they once were. Thomas looked haggard, like the weight of his failures was finally catching up to him, and Emily, well, let's just say she didn't have that same air of superiority she used to flaunt. When she saw me, she had the audacity to smile, like she thought we were going to have some friendly chat. I wasn't having it. I walked right past her without a word, not giving her the satisfaction of my attention. She must have hated that. For years, she had manipulated me, twisted me around her finger, and now I was out of her reach. That was the real victory. Things went from bad to worse for them. I heard they were fighting constantly. Thomas couldn't keep a job, and Emily, who had thought she was trading up when she left me for him, was now stuck with a man who couldn't deliver the life she thought she deserved. It didn't take long for her to realize that the golden future she had imagined with Thomas wasn't coming. I'm sure she was regretting every decision she made, but I didn't care. She had made her bed, literally, and now she had to lie in it. Meanwhile, I kept building. The business was booming, and my confidence grew with every new success. But it wasn't just about the money. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control of the business, of my life, of everything, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that away from me again. Anna and I continued to work closely together, and over time, our professional relationship started to shift. There was a spark between us, something real, something genuine. It wasn't like what I had with Emily, where everything was calculated and manipulative. With Anna, it was different. She wasn't after my money or my name. She respected me for who I was, and I respected her for her talent and drive. We started spending more time together outside of work, grabbing drinks, going to dinner. Before long, those dinners turned into something more. It wasn't planned. I wasn't looking for another relationship after the mess with Emily, but sometimes life throws things at you that you don't expect. And honestly, after everything I'd been through, it felt good. It felt good to be with someone who didn't have an agenda, someone who saw me for who I was, not for what I could give them. But even as things with Anna began to develop, I couldn't fully escape the shadow of my past. Emily, despite everything, was still out there, still lurking in the background, waiting for her chance to strike. I knew she wasn't done yet. I knew there was more to come. One night, after a long day at work, I got a call. It was Emily. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. "Lucas," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "We need to talk." When Emily called that night, I knew something was up. There was a part of me that wanted to ignore her, to let her rot in whatever mess she'd created for herself with Thomas. But curiosity got the better of me, and against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was soft, almost vulnerable, which immediately put me on guard. This was a woman who had shattered my life, torn apart my family, and betrayed me in the worst possible way. But now, she sounded like someone who had been beaten down by the very choices she made. "Lucas," she said again after I didn't respond. "Can we talk?" I didn't know whether to laugh or hang up the phone. What the hell could we possibly have to talk about, Emily? There was a pause. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "I should have never left you for Thomas. I realized I was wrong about everything." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief bubbling up inside me. This was it, the moment I knew would come eventually. Emily was coming back to try and fix the unfixable. I could picture her sitting in whatever dingy apartment she and Thomas were now living in, plotting her return. "You made a mistake?" I echoed, my voice flat. "You think you could just come back after everything you did? After sleeping with my brother? After using me, manipulating me, betraying me? And now, because your life with Thomas has gone to shit, you want me to forgive and forget?" "I know I messed up," she said quickly, as if trying to grab on any sliver of hope. "But I've had time to think, and I realize now that I love you, Lucas. I never should have left you. Thomas, he's not who I thought he was." I laughed bitterly. The sheer audacity of it all was mind-blowing. "Let me get this straight. You love me now? After all the lies, the cheating, the bullshit, you suddenly love me because your better option turned out to be a failure." "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. We can start over." For a second, just a split second, I felt a flicker of the old me. The Lucas who might have been naive enough to believe her. But that Lucas was long gone. The man she had broken, the one who had spent sleepless nights tormented by her betrayal, wasn't here anymore. I was different now, stronger, harder, and smarter. And there was no way in hell I was going to let her worm her way back into my life. "You're not sorry, Emily," I said, my voice steady. "You're just desperate. You're only here because Thomas couldn't give you the life you thought you deserved. And now you're crawling back because you've got nothing left. But I'm not that same guy you left behind. You don't get to come back and fix things because there's nothing to fix." "But I love you," she started, but I cut her off. "No, you don't," I snapped. "You never loved me. You loved what I could give you. You loved the idea of having power and wealth. But now that your little fantasy with Thomas has crumbled, you're here, hoping to suck me dry again. But it's not going to happen." I could hear her crying on the other end of the line, but I didn't care. I had no more sympathy left for her. This was a woman who had destroyed everything we had, who had laughed in my face after I caught her with my brother, and now she was trying to play the victim. I wasn't falling for it. "We're done, Emily," I said coldly. "You made your choice. Now live with it." Before she could say another word, I hung up. And just like that, the weight of her, of everything she represented, lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt free. Emily was no longer a part of my life. She was a mistake, a chapter one had closed, and I wasn't about to let her drag me back into the misery she created. As the weeks passed, I threw myself even deeper into the business. Anna and I grew closer, both professionally and personally. She was everything Emily wasn't, honest, driven, and real. There were no games with Anna. No manipulation, no secrets. We understood each other in a way that I never had with Emily. And for the first time in my life, I realized what it was like to be with someone who genuinely cared about me, not what I could offer. We started spending more time together outside of work, and eventually, those late nights in the office turned into dinners, which turned into something deeper. There wasn't any rush, no pressure. It was just right. I didn't have to second-guess her intentions or wonder if she was playing some long con to get to the family fortune. She didn't care about that. Anna saw me for who I was, not the name on my business card or the money in my bank account. And as for Thomas, well, his downfall was inevitable. After Emily's call, it didn't take long for the cracks in their relationship to turn into full-blown fractures. I heard from some mutual acquaintances that they were fighting constantly. Thomas couldn't hold a job, and Emily had lost whatever respect she had for him when she realized he was never going to be the man she thought he could be. Eventually, they split up, just like I knew they would. They were both users, and when they had nothing left to gain from each other, there was no reason to stay together. Thomas, once the golden boy of the Steiner family, was left with nothing. He had burned every bridge, lost every opportunity, and now he was just another cautionary tale of a man who had it all and threw it away. As for Emily, well, I have no idea where she ended up. Frankly, I don't care. She's no longer my problem. Looking back now, I see that everything that happened, while painful, was necessary. I needed to go through that betrayal, to lose everything, in order to find out who I really was. Emily's betrayal, Thomas's greed, it all forced me to confront the truth about myself. I had spent too long living in the shadows, letting other people dictate the course of my life. But not anymore. Now, I'm in control. The business is thriving. My relationship with Anna is something I never thought I'd have, and most importantly, I've found peace with myself. I've learned that sometimes you have to go through the darkest times to find the light on the other side. And as for the past, it's just that, the past. Emily and Thomas may have tried to destroy me, but in the end, they only made me stronger.